When Tom Bradley called me a bleeding heart charity case at the office Christmas party, I smiled and excused myself to the restroom. When I returned, I'd already decided he was going to pay for every cruel word. What I didn't know was that my act of quiet revenge would save my life in ways I never imagined. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up and tell you how a $5 bill and a teenage girl with dirty fingernails became the most important relationship of my 54-year life. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be taking life advice from a homeless kid, I'd have suggested they check their medication schedule. But Maya turned out to be smarter than my entire accounting department combined, and definitely more trustworthy than my so-called colleagues. Every morning at 7:15, I walked past the Starbucks on 5th Street, where Maya had been sleeping in the doorway for the past 6 months. Most people pretended not to see her, but after working downtown for 8 years, you notice the regulars. Maya wasn't like the other homeless people in our area. She was young, maybe 17, with intelligent green eyes that seemed to catalog everything around her. The first time I gave her money was a Tuesday in September. She'd been reading a battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and something about seeing a kid her age with a classic novel just broke something open in my chest. I pulled a 5 from my wallet without overthinking it. "For coffee," I said, setting it beside her sleeping bag. She looked up at me with those sharp eyes. "Thanks, lady." "Donna," I corrected. "My name's Donna." "Maya." She tucked the book carefully into her backpack like it was made of gold. "And I don't actually drink coffee. Too expensive. But I appreciate the gesture." That honesty hit me harder than any sob story could have. Here was a kid living on the street who wouldn't lie about what she'd spend my money on. I found myself stopping by her corner every morning after that, sometimes with cash, sometimes with a breakfast sandwich, always for just a few minutes of conversation that had become the best part of my day. Maya had been on the street since aging out of foster care 8 months earlier. She was whip-smart, with a sarcastic sense of humor that reminded me of myself at that age, back when I still believed I could change the world through pure determination and attitude. "So what's your story, Donna?" she asked me one October morning while unwrapping the egg sandwich I'd brought her. "You don't seem like the typical corporate zombie who works in that building." I laughed despite myself. "Corporate zombie? That's harsh. But accurate?" She raised an eyebrow, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Unfortunately." I adjusted my blazer, suddenly aware of how stiff and uncomfortable my work clothes felt. "I'm an accountant at Bradley & Associates. Been there 8 years, and most days I feel like I'm slowly fossilizing at my desk. Why don't you leave?" Such a simple question from a teenager. And yet it was one I'd been avoiding for years. The truth was, I'd gotten comfortable in my misery. Comfortable enough to stay, not comfortable enough to be happy. "It's complicated," I said, which was what adults always said when they didn't want to admit they were scared. Maya nodded like she understood perfectly. "Fear makes people do stupid things. Trust me, I know." Over the following weeks, Maya became my unofficial downtown advisor. She knew which food trucks had the best deals, which alleys were safe shortcuts, and most importantly, she observed everything that happened in our little corner of the city with the intensity of someone whose survival depended on staying alert. "Your boss is a piece of work," she commented one November morning. I turned to see Tom Bradley climbing out of his BMW, talking loudly into his phone about some deal he was closing. Even from 50 feet away, his voice carried that particular blend of arrogance and insecurity that made my skin crawl. "You know Tom Bradley?" I asked, surprised. "I know he parks illegally in the handicapped spot twice a week, screams at his secretary through his office window, and thinks he's hot stuff because he drives a car that costs more than most people make in 2 years. Maya wiped her hands on the napkin I'd brought with her breakfast burrito. "Also, he's the type who pretends homeless people are invisible unless there's an audience to watch him be charitable." That assessment was so accurate, it made me laugh out loud. "You should be a therapist, Maya. You read people better than anyone I know." "Survival skill," she said simply. "When you're on the street, reading people wrong can get you killed." As December arrived and the morning air grew colder, I started bringing Maya warmer clothes along with breakfast. She never asked for anything, but she accepted my offerings with a gratitude that never felt performative or manipulative. She was genuine in a way that made most of the adults in my life seem like actors playing roles. Donna, can I ask you something? Maya said one particularly cold Tuesday morning. Of course. Why do you care? I mean, I'm grateful, don't get me wrong. But most people in expensive suits walk past me like I'm part of the architecture. You stop and talk to me like I'm actually human. I thought about that question for a moment, watching the early commuters hurry past us with their eyes fixed on their phones. Maybe because you remind me that there's still real people in the world. Most days at work, I feel like I'm surrounded by robots programmed to care only about profit margins and office politics. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Your coworkers sound like they suck. That's putting it mildly. I glanced at my watch, realizing I needed to head upstairs soon. Sometimes I think the only honest conversations I have anymore are with you. Well, that's depressing, Maya said with a grin, but also kind of flattering. As I walked toward the office building that morning, I had no idea that my relationship with Maya was about to become the most important factor in keeping me alive. Sometimes the most crucial friendships come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes a teenager with nothing to lose sees dangers that adults with everything to protect completely miss. That afternoon, I noticed Tom Bradley and Helen Curtis having what appeared to be an intense conversation in the conference room. Their body language was serious, conspiratorial, and when Helen glanced in my direction through the glass walls, something cold settled in my stomach. Helen Curtis had been working at Bradley & Associates for 3 years, ever since Tom hired her away from a competing firm with promises of quick advancement and higher commissions. She was attractive in that carefully maintained way that required significant time and money, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a wardrobe that cost more than my car. From day one, Helen made it clear that she considered herself destined for bigger things than a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Cleveland. She talked constantly about networking events, important connections, and investment opportunities, as if saying the words often enough would manifest the wealth she clearly believed she deserved. Helen's relationship with Tom was complicated in the way that office relationships always are when ambition gets mixed up with attraction. They weren't dating, exactly, but there was definitely something happening between them that went beyond professional collaboration. They're planning something, Maya observed Thursday morning, watching Tom and Helen arrive at the office together for the 3rd time that week. Planning what? I asked, following her gaze. I don't know yet, but I can tell by their body language. They're excited about something, like they're sharing a secret that makes them feel powerful. Maya had wrapped herself in the thick winter coat I'd bought her the previous week, but she was still shivering in the December cold. People look like that when they're about to do something they know they shouldn't. I studied Tom and Helen more carefully as they entered the building. Maya was right. There was definitely an energy between them that felt charged with anticipation. Maybe they're just working on a big client proposal, I suggested, though something in my gut told me that wasn't it. Maybe, Maya said, but she didn't sound convinced. Just be careful, Donna. I've seen that look before, and it usually means trouble for someone. At work that day, I found myself paying closer attention to Tom and Helen's interactions. They had several private meetings in Tom's office with the door closed, which was unusual since Tom normally liked to keep his office door open so everyone could see how important and busy he was. During lunch, I overheard Helen on a phone call in the break room that made my skin prickle with unease. No, it has to look completely accidental, she was saying in a low voice. Nothing that could ever be traced back to us. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, Helen's expression shifted immediately to her usual professional smile. Hey, Donna, just dealing with some family drama. You know how it is. I nodded and retreated to my desk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Helen was planning had nothing to do with family. The phrase, "look completely accidental," kept echoing in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, I mentioned the conversation to Maya during our usual morning chat that had somehow evolved into evening check-ins as well. She said it had to look accidental? Maya's eyes sharpened with interest. That's not family drama talk, Donna. That's planning some kind of scam or worse. You think I'm being paranoid? Maya shook her head firmly. You're being smart. Trust your instincts about these people. I've been watching them for months, and neither one of them is what they pretend to be. What do you mean? Tom Bradley acts like he's some big-shot businessman, but his car payments are 3 months behind. I heard him on the phone with his bank last month begging for another extension. And Helen Curtis? She's living way beyond her means. Designer everything, expensive dinners, constant shopping. She's either got a secret sugar daddy or she's drowning in debt. Maya's observations aligned with things I'd noticed, but never really processed. Tom's increasingly desperate pursuit of new clients. Helen's casual mentions of financial stress disguised as humble bragging about her expensive lifestyle. So what do you think they're planning? I asked. Something that involves making money fast and making it look like an accident. Maya pulled her knit cap down over her ears. And if they're having secret meetings about it, whatever they're planning probably isn't legal. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Maya's warnings. I started paying closer attention to Tom and Helen's behavior, and what I observed made me increasingly uncomfortable. Tom had been asking casual questions about my personal life, where I lived, whether I had family in the area, what my routine was like outside of work. At first, I'd thought he was just being friendly, but the questions felt oddly specific and persistent. Helen, meanwhile, had been particularly nice to me lately, which was suspicious since she'd barely acknowledged my existence for 3 years. She'd started bringing me coffee in the mornings and making small talk about my weekend plans. "They're gathering information about you," Maya said when I described their recent behavior. "People don't suddenly become interested in someone's personal life unless they're planning to use that information for something." "Use it for what?" Maya's expression was grim. "Nothing good, Donna. Nothing good at all." The Friday afternoon before everything changed, I watched Tom and Helen have another intense conversation in the conference room. This time, Helen was taking notes on a yellow legal pad, and when they finished talking, she tore off the pages and tucked them into her purse. As I packed up my desk at the end of the day, Helen approached with her usual fake smile. "Hey, Donna, what are your plans for the weekend? Anything exciting?" "Just the usual," I said carefully. "Cleaning, laundry, maybe catching up on some reading." "Sounds relaxing. Will you be home most of the weekend?" The question felt wrong somehow. Too specific to be casual conversation. "Why do you ask?" Helen's smile flickered slightly. "Oh, no reason. I just worry about people spending too much time alone, especially during the holidays." Walking home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Helen's questions had been some kind of test or information gathering. Maya's warnings about people planning something that needed to look accidental kept echoing in my mind. I had no idea that by Monday morning, Maya would be saving my life with information she'd overheard in that same alley where she slept every night. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of biting December wind that made everyone on the street walk faster and keep their heads down. I found Maya in her usual spot, but something was different about her demeanor. She was fidgety, alert in a way that reminded me of a cat sensing an approaching storm. "Donna, I need to tell you something important," she said, before I could even offer her the breakfast sandwich I'd brought. "What's wrong? You look nervous." Maya glanced around the street corner, checking to see who might be listening. "Last night, around 11, your boss and that blonde woman came down here." "Tom and Helen? What were they doing here?" "Talking about you." Maya's voice was low and urgent. "They didn't know I was here. I was hidden behind the dumpster because it was so cold. But they stood right over there by the street lamp. And I heard everything. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather settled in my chest. What did they say?" "The woman said, 'It has to happen tonight, Tom. We can't wait any longer.' And your boss said something about making sure you weren't home when it happened." "When what happened?" Maya looked directly at me, her green eyes serious. "They're going to set fire to your house, Donna. Tonight. They said it had to look like an electrical fire, something with the wiring in your basement." The breakfast sandwich slipped from my hands and hit the pavement. "What? That's impossible. Why would they want to burn down my house?" "I don't know why. But I know what I heard. The woman kept talking about how it would solve all their problems and make everything look natural. Your boss said something about insurance and how no one would ever suspect anything." Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "After they left, I went to see if they'd dropped anything. I found this in the alley where they were standing." She handed me what appeared to be a page torn from Helen's yellow legal pad. In Helen's neat handwriting, I could see my name at the top of the page, followed by what looked like my home address, my car make and model, and notations about my work schedule. Below that, in Tom's messier handwriting, were phrases that made my blood run cold. Basement electrical, Friday night after 11 p.m., and insurance claim, 6 months minimum. This is insane, I whispered, staring at the paper. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. Donna, look at me. Maya's voice was firm. I know you want to believe these people aren't capable of this, but I've seen enough bad people to recognize them when I see them. Your boss and that woman are planning to commit arson, and they're planning to do it when you're supposed to be sleeping in that house. The reality of what Maya was telling me began to sink in. Tom and Helen weren't just planning to destroy my property. They were planning something that could easily kill me if I was home when it happened. But why? What could they possibly gain from burning down my house? I don't know, but I heard enough to know this is real. You can't go home tonight, Donna, and you need to call the police. I looked down at the paper again, studying the handwriting I recognized from countless office memos and documents. There was no denying these were Tom and Helen's notes, written in their own hand. There's something else, Maya said quietly. While they were talking, I heard the woman mention something about a will. She said once the house was gone and the insurance money came through, they wouldn't have to worry about you changing your mind. Changing my mind about what? I don't understand any of this. Maya shrugged. I just know what I heard. But Donna, these people think you have something valuable enough to commit murder for. You need to figure out what that is before tonight. The word murder hit me like a physical blow. Until Maya said it out loud, I'd been thinking of this as some kind of elaborate insurance fraud. But if they were planning to set fire to my house while expecting me to be inside, I need to think about this, I said, my voice shaking slightly. There has to be something I'm missing, some reason why they would target me specifically. Don't think too long, Maya warned. It's Monday morning, and they're planning this for tonight. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it fast. As I walked into the office that morning, everything looked the same as always, but felt completely different. Tom greeted me with his usual indifferent nod. Helen smiled and asked about my weekend. The normalcy of it all made Maya's warnings seem surreal, like something out of a thriller novel rather than my actual life. But the piece of paper in my purse was real. The handwriting was real. And Maya had no reason to lie to me about something this serious. Throughout the morning, I found myself studying Tom and Helen's behavior with new eyes. Were they acting more nervous than usual? Did their conversations seem more secretive? Was Helen's smile just a little too bright? Tom's casual questions just a little too probing? During my lunch break, I called my homeowner's insurance company and asked about my policy details. What I discovered made Maya's warnings even more terrifying. My house was insured for $340,000, significantly more than its current market value, due to a policy I'd updated several years earlier. More importantly, I'd recently added a clause that would pay out additional money if the fire was caused by faulty electrical work. Someone who knew the details of my insurance policy could expect to see a substantial payout if my house burned down under the right circumstances. But how would Tom and Helen have access to that information? The answer came to me as I was walking back from lunch. 6 months ago, Tom had asked all employees to provide updated emergency contact information and insurance details for payroll purposes. I dutifully filled out the forms, including detailed information about my homeowner's insurance. At the time, it had seemed like routine office administration. Now I realized it had been information gathering for something much more sinister. By 3 p.m., I had made my decision. I wasn't going home tonight, and I was going to find out exactly what Tom and Helen thought they could gain from burning down my house. Instead of leaving work at my usual 5 p.m., I told Helen I was staying late to catch up on some year-end reconciliation work. She seemed pleased by this information, which only confirmed my suspicions that they wanted to know exactly where I'd be and when. Don't work too hard, Helen said with that practiced smile. Make sure you get home at a reasonable hour and get some rest. The irony of Helen encouraging me to go home early on the night they'd planned to burn my house down would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. After Tom and Helen left for the day, I stayed in the office and used my computer to do some investigating. What I found in the company's client files made everything Maya had overheard make horrifying sense. 3 months ago, I'd inherited $280,000 from my great-aunt Margaret, a woman I'd barely known, but who had apparently remembered me fondly enough to leave me a significant portion of her estate. The money was currently sitting in a savings account while I figured out what to do with it. I'd mentioned the inheritance to exactly 3 people: my sister in Phoenix, my financial advisor, and Helen Curtis. I'd told Helen about the inheritance during a moment of excitement after receiving the lawyer's call, swearing her to secrecy since I didn't want the whole office to know about my sudden windfall. Helen had been appropriately congratulatory and sworn to keep my secret. Apparently, Helen had shared my secret with Tom because buried in his personal files on the company computer was a folder labeled D. Matthews Financial Assessment. Inside that folder were copies of documents I'd never authorized anyone to access: my credit report, my bank statements, my insurance policies, and detailed notes about my inheritance. Someone had been conducting extensive research into my financial situation. The most chilling document in the folder was a timeline that laid out Tom and Helen's plan in detail. Phase 1. Confirm DM's financial assets and living situation. Phase 2. Eliminate DM through house fire, electrical malfunction. Phase 3. Access inheritance through fraudulent will documentation. Phase 4. Split proceeds 60-40, TBHC. At the bottom of the timeline, in Tom's handwriting, was a note that made my hands shake. HC confirmed DM has no family in area. Death will appear accidental. No investigation expected. They hadn't just been planning to burn down my house for the insurance money. They'd been planning to kill me so they could steal my inheritance. But how did they expect to access money that was in my personal bank account? The answer was in another document in Tom's folder. A forged will that left my entire estate to Helen Curtis, described as my closest friend and confidant. Helen had been cultivating our workplace friendship for months, taking photos of us together at office events, saving emails where I'd thanked her for various small favors, building a paper trail that would support her claim that we'd been close friends. According to their plan, after I died in the accidental house fire, Helen would produce this forged will and claim that I'd named her as my beneficiary because I had no close family in the area. With my house destroyed and me dead, there would be no one to contest her claim. The level of premeditation was staggering. They'd been planning my murder for months, carefully gathering information and creating documentation that would let them steal everything I owned. I printed copies of every document in Tom's folder, then sent email copies to my personal account. By the time I left the office that night, I had enough evidence to send both Tom and Helen to prison for conspiracy to commit murder. But first, I had to survive the night. I drove to a hotel across town and checked in under my maiden name, paying cash for a room on the 3rd floor with a view of the parking lot. Then I called Maya on the phone number she'd given me for emergencies. I found out why they want to burn down my house, I told her. It's not just about the insurance money. They're trying to kill me so they can steal my inheritance. Holy hell, Donna. How much money are we talking about? Almost $300,000. Maya was quiet for a moment. That's definitely murder money. People have killed for a lot less than that. I've got evidence of their whole plan. I printed everything from Tom's computer, but I need to figure out how to stop them without getting killed in the process. Where are you now? Hotel downtown. I'm not going anywhere near my house tonight. Good. What about tomorrow? You can't hide in a hotel forever. I'd been thinking about that question all afternoon. I'm going to set a trap for them. If they think their plan worked, they'll have to move forward with the next phase, and that's when I'll have them. Donna, these people are planning to commit murder. You shouldn't try to handle this alone. I'm not alone, I said, looking out the hotel window at the city lights below. I have you, and I have evidence, and I have the advantage of being smarter than both of them combined. The next morning, I would put my plan into action. But first, I needed to let Tom and Helen believe they had succeeded in killing me. At 11:47 p.m., I sat in my hotel room and watched the local news website refresh on my laptop screen. If Tom and Helen had followed through with their plan, the story would break sometime before midnight. At 12:23 a.m., the headline appeared: Downtown Cleveland House, Fire Kills Accounting Firm Employee. My hands shook as I read the article describing how an electrical fire had consumed my small 2-story house in the Tremont neighborhood. According to the fire department spokesman, the blaze had started in the basement electrical panel and spread rapidly through the older home's wooden structure. The victim has been identified as Donna Matthews, 54, an accountant at Bradley and Associates. Matthews was apparently asleep when the fire started and was overcome by smoke before she could escape. Her body was recovered from the second-floor bedroom. The victim. My body. According to the Cleveland Plain Dealer website, I was officially dead. I called Maya's emergency number. "Are you okay?" she answered on the first ring. "I'm alive, but according to the news, I'm dead. They actually did it. Maya, they burned down my house. Did anyone get hurt? No, because I wasn't there. But the news is reporting that they found a body in the house." Maya was quiet for a moment. "That's impossible unless... Donna, did they actually kill someone else and put the body in your house?" The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it was horrifyingly plausible. I don't know, but if they did, this went from arson and attempted murder to actual murder. "You need to call the police right now." "Not yet. If I surface now, they'll know their plan failed, and they'll either disappear or try again. I need to let them think they succeeded so I can catch them in the act of the next part of their plan." "What's the next part?" "Helen is going to produce a forged will that leaves everything to her. She'll probably wait a few days to let the dust settle, then contact a lawyer and claim that I named her as my beneficiary." The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove to a different part of town, where I paid cash for a week-long stay at an extended stay motel. Then I went shopping for a disguise. Maya had suggested changing my appearance enough that Tom and Helen wouldn't recognize me if they happened to see me around town. So I bought a short black wig, different style glasses, and clothes that were completely different from my usual professional wardrobe. Transformed from middle-aged accountant to artsy downtown resident, I felt confident enough to venture back to Maya's corner that afternoon. "You look totally different," Maya said approvingly. "Your own mother wouldn't recognize you." "Good. Now I need you to help me keep watch on Tom and Helen. I want to know everything they do over the next few days." Maya nodded. "I can do that. Where will you be?" "Following them, taking pictures, gathering evidence, and waiting for them to make their move with the will." That afternoon, I positioned myself across the street from Bradley and Associates and watched Tom and Helen arrive at work. Even from a distance, I could see they were both dressed more formally than usual, as if they were planning to attend something important. Helen was carrying a leather portfolio that I'd never seen before, and Tom's demeanor seemed unusually confident and animated. They looked like people who had just solved a major problem. Around 10 a.m., Helen left the office building and walked 3 blocks to the law offices of Peterson and Associates. She stayed inside for nearly an hour, emerging with what appeared to be additional documents in her portfolio. I followed her back to the office, where she and Tom spent the rest of the morning in his private conference room with the door closed and the blinds drawn. At lunchtime, I called the law firm Helen had visited. "Peterson and Associates, how may I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling about a will that may have been filed this morning. The deceased was Donna Matthews." "Oh yes, Ms. Curtis was just here about that. Such a tragic situation. Are you a family member?" "Yes," I lied. "I'm her sister from out of town. I just heard about the fire. I'm so sorry for your loss." Ms. Curtis explained that Ms. Matthews had no immediate family, but she left everything to Ms. Curtis as her closest friend. The will is being filed for probate this afternoon. "Did Ms. Curtis provide proof that she was my sister's friend?" "Oh yes, she had extensive documentation. Photos, emails, even a handwritten note from your sister expressing her wishes. Everything seemed to be in order." I hung up feeling sick to my stomach. Helen had been thorough in creating her fake documentation, and she was moving faster than I'd expected. But she'd also made a crucial mistake. In her rush to claim my inheritance, she was creating a paper trail that would destroy her when I emerged from the dead. That evening, Maya met me at a diner near the motel where I was staying. "They've been celebrating," she reported. "Both of them left work early and went to some fancy restaurant downtown. I couldn't get close enough to hear what they were saying, but they were definitely toasting something with champagne. They're celebrating my death and their upcoming windfall. When are you going to contact the police?" I pulled out the folder of evidence I'd compiled over the past 2 days. "Tomorrow morning. But first, I need to make one more stop." Maya looked at the folder. "What's that?" "Everything Tom and Helen need to go to prison for the rest of their lives. Financial records, copies of their plan, photos of Helen filing the forged will, and most importantly, the piece of paper you found in the alley that proves they were planning this from the beginning. Maya smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. So we actually got them? We got them. But the best part is, they think they got away with it. They have no idea that the woman they think they killed is about to walk into a police station and destroy their lives. I thought about Tom calling me a bleeding heart charity case at the Christmas party, about Helen's fake friendship and casual cruelty, about how they'd planned to murder me in my sleep for money. Tomorrow morning, they would discover that underestimating the kindness of strangers and the intelligence of the homeless teenager they'd ignored was the biggest mistake of their lives. The $5 bills I'd been giving Maya every morning had just bought me the most valuable information of my life. Sometimes, charity really is its own reward. Wednesday morning at 8:15 a.m., I walked into the Cleveland Police Department downtown precinct wearing my black wig and carrying a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The desk sergeant looked up at me with the weary expression of someone who'd already heard every crazy story Cleveland had to offer. "I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder," I said calmly. "And I have documentation." That got his attention fast enough. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to my story without interrupting once. When I finished explaining the situation, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "Ms. Matthews, you're telling me that you faked your own death to catch your co-workers in a murder plot?" "I didn't fake anything. I just didn't correct their assumption that I was dead." I slid the folder across the desk. "Everything you need is in there. Financial records, copies of their planning documents, photos of Helen filing the forged will, and the handwritten note they dropped in the alley." Detective Chen opened the folder and began reviewing the contents. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she read through Tom and Helen's documented plan. "This timeline here," she said, pointing to the document I'd found on Tom's computer. "This shows premeditation going back months. They've been planning this since I told Helen about my inheritance." She immediately shared the information with Tom, and they started building their case that I had no family, so no one would question my death. "About that," Detective Chen said, looking up from the papers, "there's something you need to know about the fire." A chill settled in my stomach. "What about it?" "We did find a body in your house. A woman, approximately your age and build. She'd been dead for at least 12 hours before the fire started. The room seemed to spin slightly." "They actually killed someone?" "It appears so. The victim had significant head trauma that occurred before the fire. Someone murdered this woman and placed her body in your house to make it look like you died in the blaze." I felt sick. My escape plan had worked, but an innocent woman had died in my place. "Do you know who she was?" "We're still working on identification, but we have reason to believe she was homeless. No missing person reports filed, no immediate family looking for her." Maya. The thought hit me like ice water. Was she young? Teenager? Maybe 17 with green eyes? Detective Chen's expression sharpened. "No, this was a woman in her 50s. Why? Do you know someone who matches that description?" Relief flooded through me so intensely, I almost started crying. Maya was safe, but some other woman, some other person with no family to miss her, had been murdered to provide a body for their plan. "There's a homeless teenager named Maya who's been helping me. She's the one who overheard their plan and warned me. I was afraid I couldn't finish the sentence. "We need to speak with Maya immediately. Her testimony will be crucial to our case." "I can arrange that. But Detective Chen, if they killed someone else to put her body in my house, this is way more serious than just attempted murder." "Yes, it is. This is now a homicide investigation with multiple felony charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, arson, fraud, identity theft, and now an actual murder charge." Detective Chen closed the folder and stood up. "Ms. Matthews, I need you to stay in protective custody until we can arrest your co-workers. If they discover you're alive, they may try to finish what they started. How long will that take? Based on this evidence, I can get warrants issued within the hour. We'll arrest them at their workplace this afternoon." The thought of Tom and Helen being arrested at Bradley and Associates in front of all our co-workers filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't expected. They'd planned to humiliate me by making me disappear. Instead, they were about to be publicly destroyed. "There's one more thing," Detective Chen said, as we prepared to leave her office. The forged will Helen filed? She's scheduled to meet with the probate court tomorrow morning to begin the asset transfer process. She's moving incredibly fast to get access to your money, which means she'll be shocked when she discovers that dead people don't usually show up to contest their own wills. Detective Chen smiled grimly. I think we can arrange for you to make an appearance at that meeting. Nothing says surprise like a murder victim walking into court. That afternoon, I sat in an unmarked police car outside Bradley & Associates and watched through tinted windows as Detective Chen and 3 other officers walked into the building where I'd worked for 8 years. Maya was beside me in the back seat, having agreed to provide her witness statement to support the case. She'd been quiet since learning about the murdered woman found in my house. Donna, what if they'd killed me instead? She asked softly. What if they'd decided a homeless teenager was easier to grab than some random woman? But they didn't. You were too smart, too careful. You heard their plan and warned me, and now they're going to pay for what they did. It could have been me in that house. I turned to look at her, this brave kid who'd saved my life simply because I'd treated her like a human being for a few months. But it wasn't. And after today, they'll never hurt anyone again. Through the office building's windows, I could see commotion on the 3rd floor where our accounting department was located. Other employees were gathering in the hallway, probably trying to figure out why police were arresting Tom and Helen in the middle of a workday. 20 minutes later, Detective Chen emerged from the building with Tom and Helen in handcuffs. Even from across the street, I could see the shock and panic on their faces as they were loaded into separate police cars. Tom kept looking around wildly, as if he expected to see me watching from somewhere nearby. Helen's face was stone cold, already calculating her next move, even as they read her rights. How does it feel? Maya asked, watching the police cars drive away. Honestly, it feels like justice. They thought they could murder me and steal my money because I was just some middle-aged accountant with no family to care what happened to me. But they were wrong. They were wrong about a lot of things. They underestimated my intelligence, they underestimated your street smarts, and they definitely underestimated how much evidence they'd leave behind when they got greedy. Detective Chen returned to our car and slid into the front seat. Both suspects are in custody. We found additional evidence in Helen's desk, including backup copies of the forged will and detailed financial projections about how they plan to split your inheritance. What happens next? Tomorrow morning, you attend that probate court meeting and watch Helen's lawyer try to explain how a dead woman just walked into the courtroom. I couldn't wait to see the look on Helen's face when her carefully planned inheritance grab collapsed in the most public way possible. Thursday morning, I sat in the back row of probate court, wearing my regular clothes and looking exactly like the Donna Matthews who was supposed to be dead. Maya had insisted on coming with me to witness what she called the best revenge plot ever. At 9:30 a.m., Helen's lawyer, Robert Peterson, stood up to address Judge Williams about the estate of Donna Matthews. Your Honor, we're here today to begin probate proceedings for my client's deceased friend, who tragically died in a house fire earlier this week. Judge Williams looked down at his paperwork. And the beneficiary is present? Yes, Your Honor. Helen Curtis has provided extensive documentation proving her close friendship with the deceased, who named Ms. Curtis as her sole beneficiary. That's when I stood up. Excuse me, Your Honor, but I believe there's been some mistake. The entire courtroom turned to look at me. Helen's face went white as paper. Her lawyer dropped his files, sending papers scattering across the floor. Who are you? Judge Williams asked, though he was clearly beginning to understand. I'm Donna Matthews, the supposedly deceased person whose estate these people are trying to steal. Helen shot to her feet, her voice shaking. That's impossible. You're dead. I saw the news report. They found your body. They found a body, Helen, but it wasn't mine. It was a woman you and Tom murdered to take my place. The courtroom erupted. Judge Williams banged his gavel for order, while Helen's lawyer tried desperately to figure out how to explain this development to his client. Ms. Curtis, Judge Williams said sternly, did you file a fraudulent will with this court? Helen's composure cracked completely. Your Honor, I can explain. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I said, walking toward the front of the court, is that Helen thought she could commit murder and fraud without getting caught. Detective Chen entered the courtroom at that moment with two uniformed officers. Helen Curtis, you're under arrest for additional charges of fraud and perjury in connection with the filing of false documents with this court. As the officers handcuffed Helen for the second time in 2 days, she looked at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, Donna. You have no idea what forces you're messing with. What forces? You mean the force of two greedy people who thought they could commit murder for money? But Helen's comment stuck with me as I watched them lead her away. Something about the way she said it suggested that Tom and Helen hadn't been working alone. After the court session ended, Detective Chen pulled me aside in the hallway. Ms. Matthews, we've been analyzing Tom Bradley's financial records, and we've discovered some irregularities that go beyond your case. What kind of irregularities? It appears Tom has been embezzling from the accounting firm for over 2 years, but the amounts involved are much larger than what he could have stolen from client accounts. How much larger? We're talking about nearly $2 million. Someone has been feeding Tom inside information about high-value targets, and your inheritance was just one of several he's been pursuing. Maya, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. Detective Chen, when I was watching them plan Donna's murder, I heard the woman mention something about a boss who needed results soon. Detective Chen's eyes sharpened. A boss? She said they were working for someone else? She said something about keeping their boss happy and not disappointing him again, like they'd failed at something before. My mind raced back through my conversations with Helen over the past few months. She'd mentioned several times that she had connections to wealthy investors, people who were looking for good opportunities to make money quickly. Detective Chen, what if Helen and Tom were part of a larger operation? What if they were targeting people with inheritance money on behalf of someone else? That's exactly what we're starting to suspect. We've identified 3 other suspicious deaths in the past 18 months, all involving people who had recently received inheritance money or insurance payouts. The scope of what I'd stumbled into was much larger than I'd realized. Tom and Helen weren't just greedy co-workers. They were part of an organized scheme to murder people for their money. Who else was killed? I asked. Detective Chen pulled out a file folder. Margaret Reeves, age 67, died in a home invasion robbery 6 months after inheriting $400,000 from her brother. James Patterson, age 71, died in a car accident 2 weeks after receiving a $300,000 insurance payout from his wife's death. And Carol Whitney, age 55, died in an apparent drug overdose 3 months after her mother left her $250,000. Maya was looking at the file with wide eyes. They've been murdering people for money for over a year? It appears so, and based on financial records we've recovered, someone was paying Tom and Helen a percentage of each successful theft. How much of a percentage? 20%. Which means someone else was keeping the other 80% of the money they stole from murder victims. I felt sick thinking about how many people had died for their inheritance money while the police investigated their deaths as random crimes or accidents. Do you know who their boss is? Detective Chen shook her head. Not yet. But we're going to find out. Tom and Helen are facing multiple murder charges now, and one of them is going to talk to save themselves from life in prison. As we left the courthouse, Maya walked beside me quietly for several blocks before finally speaking. Donna, what if they come after you again? What if their boss decides you're too dangerous to leave alive? I'd been wondering the same thing. If Tom and Helen were part of a larger criminal organization, my survival and the exposure of their operation made me a significant threat to whoever was running the scheme. Then we'll have to be smarter than they are, I said. But Maya, you've already done enough. You saved my life, and you helped catch multiple murderers. You don't have to put yourself at risk anymore. Maya stopped walking and looked at me seriously. Donna, these people killed an innocent woman and put her body in your house. They've murdered at least 3 other people that we know about. I'm not walking away from this until whoever's behind it is in prison. Looking at this brave, determined teenager, I realized that my $5 morning donations had bought me much more than breakfast for a homeless kid. They'd bought me the loyalty of someone who understood better than most adults that sometimes you have to fight back against people who think they can destroy others without consequences. All right, I said, but we do this carefully, and we do this smart. What I didn't know was that our conversation was being overheard by someone who had already decided that both Maya and I needed to disappear permanently. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my hotel room. I was drinking coffee and reading news coverage of Tom and Helen's arrest when someone knocked softly on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a well-dressed man in his 60s holding what appeared to be a legal document. He looked like a lawyer, but something about his posture seemed wrong, too tense for a routine legal visit. "Who is it?" I called through the door. "Ms. Matthews? My name is David Morrison. I'm an attorney representing some clients who need to discuss the situation with Tom Bradley and Helen Curtis." I kept the chain lock engaged and opened the door just wide enough to see him clearly. "What clients?" Morrison held up a business card that identified him as a partner at Morrison, Hous and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. People who were financially involved with Mr. Bradley's activities and are concerned about the legal exposure his arrest has created. "I don't understand. What does Tom's embezzlement have to do with me? May I come in? This is a conversation better had in private." Everything about this felt wrong. Legitimate lawyers didn't show up at hotel rooms unannounced to discuss criminal cases with victims. They made appointments, worked through other attorneys, followed proper procedures. "I'd prefer to handle this through my attorney," I said. "You can contact Detective Chen if you need to discuss anything related to the case." Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Matthews, I think you misunderstand the seriousness of your situation. The people I represent have invested considerable resources in certain operations that your survival has now jeopardized." There it was. This wasn't a lawyer making a routine legal call. This was a threat. "I'm closing the door now. Mr. Morrison, if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." That would be unfortunate for several people, including your young friend Maya. My blood turned to ice. They knew about Maya. They knew she was involved. "If you or your clients harm that girl, no harm will come to anyone if you're willing to be reasonable about resolving this situation." I opened the door wider, keeping the chain engaged. "What do you want?" Morrison pulled out a legal document and held it up so I could see it. "A simple non-disclosure agreement. You agree not to testify against any parties beyond Tom Bradley and Helen Curtis, and you agree not to discuss any details of this case with law enforcement or the media. And in exchange, your inheritance money is returned to you minus reasonable expenses, and you and Maya are left alone to rebuild your lives. What happens if I refuse?" Morrison's smile was cold and professional. "Well, accidents happen, Ms. Matthews. House fires, car crashes, random street violence. Cleveland can be a dangerous city, especially for people who don't have anyone looking out for them. You're threatening to kill me. I'm offering you a business arrangement that benefits everyone involved. The choice is yours." I stared at the document in his hands, understanding that I was looking at an ultimatum from whoever had been running Tom and Helen's murder-for-money operation. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "Because dead people can't spend inheritance money, and live people who keep their mouths shut don't pose any threat to anyone's business interests." "I need time to think about it." Morrison checked his watch. "You have until 6 p.m. today to sign this document and deliver it to the address listed at the bottom. If we don't receive it by then, we'll assume you've chosen the more difficult path." He slid the document under the door chain and walked away without another word. I immediately called Detective Chen and explained what had just happened. Within an hour, she was at my hotel with 2 federal agents and a tech team that was setting up recording equipment in my room. "Ms. Matthews, you've just been contacted by representatives of what appears to be a sophisticated criminal organization," Agent Patricia Ross explained. "The FBI has been tracking similar operations in 3 other states." "Similar how?" "Teams of people who identify inheritance recipients, insurance beneficiaries, and lottery winners, then murder them and steal their money through forged documents and fraudulent claims." Agent Ross showed me photographs of Tom and Helen alongside pictures of 8 other people I didn't recognize. "We believe this organization has been responsible for at least 20 murders across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan over the past 3 years." Maya arrived at the hotel an hour later under police protection, having been picked up from her usual street corner after Detective Chen realized she might also be in danger. "So they want you to keep quiet about the bigger operation," Maya said after I explained Morrison's visit, "which means there's definitely a bigger operation to keep quiet about. The question is, do we use this meeting tonight to try to catch whoever Morrison represents, or do we play it safe and let the FBI handle this their way?" Agent Ross was clear about her preference. Ms. Matthews, we want you to wear a wire to this meeting and help us identify the people behind this organization. And if something goes wrong, we'll have agents positioned throughout the area. You'll be completely protected. Maya looked skeptical. These people have killed at least 20 people. They're not going to hesitate to kill Donna if they figure out she's working with the FBI, which is why we're going to be very careful about how we handle this. I looked at the non-disclosure agreement Morrison had left, studying the address where I was supposed to deliver it that evening. The location was a warehouse in Cleveland's industrial district, exactly the kind of isolated area where bad things happen to people who ask too many questions. I'll do it, I said, but I want Maya somewhere safe while this is happening. Absolutely. We'll have her in protective custody until this operation is complete. As the afternoon wore on and the FBI team prepared for the evening meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something much more dangerous than anyone realized. The people behind this operation had been murdering innocent people for years without being caught. They had enough resources to employ lawyers, pay operatives like Tom and Helen, and threaten federal witnesses. Morrison's confident threat suggested they had backup plans for dealing with people who didn't cooperate with their business arrangements. At 5:30 p.m., Agent Ross fitted me with a wire and went over the plan one more time. You deliver the unsigned document and tell them you need more time to consider their offer. Try to get them to explain more about their operation, identify other people involved, and give us enough information to shut down their entire network. And if they don't want to talk? If they just decide to kill me on the spot? That won't happen. We'll be monitoring everything, and our response team will be in position to intervene if necessary. Maya hugged me before I left for the meeting. Donna, you don't have to do this. You've already done enough. Yes, I do have to do this. These people killed that woman and put her body in my house. They've murdered at least 20 other people. If I don't help stop them now, they'll just keep killing. Then be smart and be careful. And remember, you're a lot tougher than they think you are. As I drove toward the warehouse district that evening, I realized Maya was right. 6 months ago, I'd been a quiet accountant who let people like Tom Bradley mock me at office parties without fighting back. Now I was about to walk into a meeting with organized killers, wearing an FBI wire and carrying enough evidence to destroy their operation. Tom had called me a bleeding heart charity case. Tonight, I was going to show him and his associates that they'd seriously underestimated this particular bleeding heart. The warehouse was exactly what I'd expected, isolated, poorly lit, and surrounded by the kind of industrial emptiness that swallowed screams. As I parked outside the building, I could see Agent Ross's surveillance van positioned 3 blocks away, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to respond if things went wrong. Morrison was waiting for me in the warehouse's main floor area, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was the last person I'd expected to see. My great-aunt Margaret's estate attorney, William Hous. "Hello, Donna," Hous said with the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. "I hear you've been having some difficulties with our mutual friends, Tom and Helen." The pieces clicked together so fast it made me dizzy. Hous had been the one with access to information about inheritance recipients. As an estate attorney, he would know exactly when people received large sums of money, when they were vulnerable, and when they had no close family to investigate suspicious deaths. "You're the boss," I said. "You've been feeding targets to Tom and Helen." "I've been providing business opportunities to motivated independent contractors," Hous corrected. "There's a significant difference. The difference being that you let them do the actual killing while you kept 80% of the stolen money." Morrison stepped forward. "Ms. Matthews, did you bring the signed agreement?" I pulled the document from my purse but kept it in my hands. "I brought it. But I have some questions first." Hous laughed. "Questions? You're hardly in a position to be making demands, Donna." "Actually, I think I am. You see, I know about Margaret Reeves, James Patterson, and Carol Whitney. I know this has been going on for 3 years, and I know that the FBI is already investigating this operation." The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hous and Morrison exchanged a look that confirmed my suspicion that they hadn't expected me to know about the other murders. "That's unfortunate," Hous said quietly. "We were hoping this could be resolved more simply." Morrison reached inside his jacket, and I saw the glint of metal. But before he could draw whatever weapon he was carrying, the warehouse lights suddenly blazed on, and FBI agents emerged from concealment positions around the building, Federal agents! Nobody move! What happened next was chaos. Morrison went for his gun, Hayes dove behind a stack of shipping containers, and I hit the floor as instructed while agents swarmed the building. The gunfire lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the shooting stopped, Morrison was on the ground bleeding from a shoulder wound, and Hayes was in handcuffs. Agent Ross helped me to my feet. "Are you hurt?" "No, but that was terrifying." "You did perfectly. The wire picked up everything we needed." Hayes just confessed to running a multi-state murder operation. As the paramedics worked on Morrison and other agents processed the crime scene, Hayes looked at me with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've cost me," he snarled. "Millions of dollars in carefully planned operations, years of development work." "Good," I said. "Maybe the families of your victims can finally get some justice." Agent Ross pulled me aside as the suspects were loaded into ambulances and police cars. "Ms. Matthews, there's something else you need to know. We found financial records in Hayes's car that show this operation was even larger than we suspected." "How much larger?" "They weren't just targeting inheritance recipients. They were also going after lottery winners, insurance beneficiaries, and elderly people with substantial retirement accounts. We're talking about a network that may have killed over 50 people in the past 5 years. The scope of it was staggering. Hayes had been systematically murdering people for their money across multiple states, using lawyers, accountants, and other professionals to identify targets and create the documentation needed to steal their assets. What happens now? Hayes and Morrison will face federal murder charges in multiple jurisdictions. Tom and Helen will face charges as accomplices in dozens of murders. And you and Maya will be key witnesses in one of the largest organized crime prosecutions in Ohio history. As we left the warehouse, I realized that my morning coffee conversations with Maya had inadvertently exposed one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in the country. Will they all go to prison? For the rest of their lives? Hayes alone is looking at over 50 counts of first-degree murder. The drive back to the hotel gave me time to process everything that had happened. 6 days ago, I'd been a quiet accountant who got mocked at office parties. Tonight, I'd helped the FBI arrest the head of a criminal organization responsible for dozens of murders. Maya was waiting for me in the hotel lobby under FBI protection, and when she saw me walk through the doors, her face lit up with relief. "Did you get them?" "We got them all. Hayes, Morrison, Tom, Helen, the entire operation." "How does it feel to be a crime-fighting badass?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "It feels like justice." But as we sat in the hotel restaurant celebrating with Agent Ross and Detective Chen, Maya asked the question that had been nagging at me all evening. "Donna, how did Hayes know you were staying at this hotel?" Agent Ross looked up from her coffee. "What do you mean?" "Morrison knew exactly where to find Donna this morning. He knew about me. He knew details about our involvement in the case that weren't in any public reports." Maya's right, I realized. Hayes knew things that only someone with access to the police investigation could have known. Agent Ross's expression grew serious. "You're suggesting there was a leak in law enforcement?" "I'm suggesting that an operation this sophisticated, running for this many years without being caught, probably had help from people in positions of authority." The celebration atmosphere in the restaurant evaporated as we all realized that catching Hayes might not have ended the threat. If there were corrupt police officers or federal agents involved in the operation, then Maya and I were still in danger from people who had badges and access to witness protection information. "We need to get you both into federal protection immediately," Agent Ross said, pulling out her phone. As she made arrangements for our security, I looked at Maya and realized that our adventure in crime fighting was far from over. 3 weeks later, I sat in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., preparing to testify before a grand jury about the Hayes murder network and the corruption investigation that had exploded out of our warehouse meeting. Agent Ross had been right about the law enforcement connections. Hayes's operation had been protected by 2 Cleveland police detectives, a county prosecutor, and a federal probation officer who had been feeding him information about ongoing investigations. Maya was beside me in the witness waiting room, looking surprisingly comfortable in the business suit the FBI had bought her for her testimony. "You nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "You?" "Nah. These people tried to kill us, remember? Now we get to destroy them legally. This is the good part. Over the past 3 weeks, the scope of Hays's operation had continued to grow. FBI investigations in 7 states had uncovered evidence of at least 73 murders committed by various teams of operatives working under Hays's direction. Tom and Helen had been just one team among many, targeting inheritance recipients in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Other teams had focused on lottery winners, insurance beneficiaries, and elderly people with substantial assets. "The thing that still gets me," Maya said, "is that Hays was your great-aunt's lawyer. He knew about your inheritance before you did." That revelation had been particularly disturbing. Hays had been targeting his own clients' beneficiaries, using information from estate planning to identify people who would soon receive large sums of money with no immediate family to investigate their deaths. My great-aunt Margaret probably told him all about me during their meetings. How I lived alone, how I didn't have close family in the area. He was planning my murder before I even knew I was inheriting money. But he made one mistake. "What's that?" Maya grinned. "He underestimated the power of $5 coffee money and genuine human kindness. When my name was called to testify, I walked into the grand jury room carrying a folder containing copies of every document, photograph, and piece of evidence Maya and I had gathered. For 2 hours, I told the story of how daily conversations with a homeless teenager had exposed a criminal network that spanned multiple states and involved corrupt law enforcement officials. The grand jurors were particularly interested in the timeline of events and how Hays had used his position as an estate attorney to target vulnerable people. "Ms. Matthews," one juror asked, "what made you decide to trust Maya's warnings about the fire?" Maya had been observing everything that happened in our area for months. "She noticed patterns that I missed because I was too focused on my work routine. When she told me she'd overheard Tom and Helen planning to burn down my house, I knew she was telling the truth because she had no reason to lie." "And you never suspected that your great-aunt's attorney might be involved?" "Not until I saw Hays at the warehouse. But looking back, it makes perfect sense. He had access to all the information about inheritance recipients, and he had the legal knowledge to create forged documents that would pass initial scrutiny." After my testimony, Maya was called to describe what she'd overheard in the alley and how she'd been observing Tom and Helen's behavior for weeks before the murder plot. "The thing people don't understand about being homeless," Maya told the grand jury, "is that you become invisible to most adults. They don't notice you, which means they say and do things around you that they would never do if they remembered you were there. Can you describe what you heard Mr. Bradley and Ms. Curtis discussing?" Maya pulled out a notebook where she'd written down everything she could remember from that night. "They were talking about making sure Donna wasn't home when the fire started, but they also mentioned that the house needed to burn hot enough to destroy any evidence. The woman, Helen, was worried about the accelerant they were using and whether it could be detected." "Did they mention accelerant specifically?" "Helen said something about gasoline being too obvious, and Tom said they were using something that would look like an electrical fire. They had it all planned out." When Maya finished her testimony, Agent Ross met us in the hallway. The grand jury voted to indict Hays on 73 counts of murder in the first degree, along with conspiracy and racketeering charges. Tom and Helen are facing multiple murder charges as well. "What about the corrupt cops?" "Indicted. The whole network is done." As we left the courthouse, Maya and I walked down the steps together toward the car that would take us back to Cleveland. "So what now?" Maya asked. "You're rich, the bad guys are in prison, and you're famous for helping solve one of the biggest criminal cases in Ohio history." It was true. The insurance company had paid out on my house. My inheritance was intact, and several news outlets had offered to pay for the rights to tell my story. "Now I figure out what to do with the rest of my life," I said. "What about you? The FBI offered to help you get into college." Maya stopped walking and looked at me seriously. "Actually, I had a different idea." "What's that?" "You know how Hays was able to run this operation for years because people like me are invisible to most adults? What if that wasn't always the case?" I waited for her to continue. "What if we started a business that hired people like me, homeless people, people living on the street, to work as investigators and security consultants? We could help people who are worried about being targeted by criminals." It was a brilliant idea. Maya had proven that people who lived on the streets often observed things that law enforcement and private security missed. "Maya, that's genius. And we could use your inheritance money to get it started. Call it something like Street Angel Investigations. I looked at this remarkable teenager who had saved my life, helped expose a massive criminal network, and was now proposing to turn her survival skills into a business that could help other people. You want to be my business partner? I want to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. And I want to prove that homeless people are a lot smarter and more valuable than most people think. 6 months later, Street Angel Investigations had 15 employees, all former homeless individuals who had been trained in surveillance, investigation techniques, and personal security. Maya, now 18 and living in her own apartment, served as our director of field operations. I handled the business side and client relations. Our first major case involved protecting a lottery winner who'd been receiving threats. Our second case helped police solve a missing person investigation that had been cold for 2 years. Tom Bradley called me a bleeding heart charity case at a Christmas party, thinking he was mocking my kindness toward Maya. He had no idea that my bleeding heart would lead to his arrest for multiple murders, or that my charity would grow into a business that protected other people from criminals like him. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving that the thing someone mocked you for was actually your greatest strength. Maya and I learned that kindness between strangers can be the most powerful force in the world, capable of stopping killers, exposing corruption, and building something beautiful from the ashes of other people's cruelty. The $5 bills I gave Maya every morning bought me much more than coffee money for a homeless teenager. They bought me a friend, a business partner, and proof that treating people with dignity can literally save lives. As Maya likes to say, we turned Tom's insult into our mission statement: bleeding hearts and charity cases, protecting people who matter. And in our office in downtown Cleveland, we keep a framed copy of the newspaper headline from the day Hous was sentenced: Homeless Teen and Accountant Expose Murder Network. Some days, being underestimated by cruel people is exactly the advantage you need to destroy them completely. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.